Welcome back to another video. In this video I want to talk a little about process versus outcome orientation. This will be a slightly longer one as I have plenty of stuff to say. Before that though, let's talk a bit about the painting I'm working on, which is called Pond of Gold, and it's 30 by 40 centimeters in dimensions. This subject is a bit of a departure from my usual paintings. I felt it really needed to be approached with lots of chroma, or color saturation in other words. That is precisely what I was craving to do after limiting the color choices to a more naturalistic palette for some time now. My thought was to make a color study, as I wanted to see if this would hold up well in paint, since I had to make some changes to my reference, since it was a lot busier than the final painted picture. I'm entertaining the thought of making this into a larger painting, but wanted to make the smaller study work as an individual painting as well. I started this painting with washes of color, trying to look for a nice gradation of greens and blues in the water. Looking back, I could have left things a lot darker at this stage, since I essentially had to go back and repaint it with something slightly more accurate again after the next step. The next step was to find the rough positions of the fish in the pond, and I did this by wiping back to the lighter ground color. Here it would have been helpful to have a darker base to wipe from, so I could actually bring out the fish better and be more accurate from the start, as now in parts I could barely leave a mark with the ground, having absorbed part of the paint. So it was basically stained to the point where I could barely leave a mark. I would have needed some solvents to further wipe that paint back. Now, not exactly difficult to do, but I just couldn't be bothered to do that. I then toned the fish with a grayed down orange as a sort of base to help with the placement and drawing of the fish, and finished the underpainting doing this. At this point I also went for a rough placement of the water lilies, and then started going over the background again to gain a bit of contrast, and then started to lay in the fish, bringing out their full color. And this step took quite a bit of time since there were so many, but it was fun to bring the shine to the fish with some of the really bright colors. For this painting, my palette had cadmium lemon, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange and cadmium red, as well as alizarin and burnt sienna. And for the water I used viridian, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue and black, both Mars black and ivory black, which I'm kind of experimenting with currently. It was fun to work with such high chroma pigments after a long while. And speaking of fun, this brings me to the topic of this video, having fun while painting. For the longest time, I feel I've been an outcome-oriented painter. This basically means that I love finishing pieces more than I enjoy working on them. And this is a thing most artists probably experience, and most fall somewhere in between the spectrum of being process or outcome-oriented. Being process-oriented, thus liking the actual painting part, is probably best for productivity overall, but the extreme of this can also be harmful to your progress in a way. And a way of this manifesting that I've heard happening is loving to start projects but not being able to finish them actually. This is probably because at the start of the process you're excited and it's more fun to many people, where you get to plan and then start covering a blank canvas, and each stroke makes a big difference to the whole. This can be very exciting and rewarding, of course. And then when the process starts to get more repetitive or difficult, requiring focus and checking for mistakes, the mind jumps to the next project and you get the nice dopamine hit from starting something fresh. An outcome-oriented painter such as myself for the longest time usually loves the feeling of having tackled and finished something difficult, but the process itself can feel like a lot of work, which it frankly speaking is. A modern version of this would be painting just to get that nice hit of dopamine from the likes on Instagram after finishing a piece and making it as impressive as you can, and then posting it online. This can be seen as a form of external motivation, and as such not great for an artist whose whole purpose, in my opinion, this can be debated of course, is to create and bring something out, not be influenced by others. At its worst, one will start steering the creative process towards creating stuff for social media posts instead of something you're genuinely interested in or passionate about. If your passion is creating for social media like YouTube for instance, then of course there is nothing wrong with that. However, the problem is if you're missing out on what you actually want to create because of social media. Obviously, most people fall somewhere in the middle of this, and that's a good place to be. We all struggle with our own things, and there are probably many more ways these things can manifest. It is helpful to know which side you tend to gravitate towards though. Personally, I feel training at an atelier really helped developing patience and forced me to start enjoying the process too. Something that really helps with this is, simply put, confidence. If you're anxious about being able to pull off something all the time and doubting every decision you make, it's likely very hard to get into anything like a flow state. It's also hard to invest a lot of hours if you don't think it's gonna maybe lead to anything. All in all, there's perks to each side, but as usual, the golden middle is probably the best, where you're excited to get working, can execute even the more boring stuff in a more work-focused state of mind, and can still see things through and celebrate a finished project accordingly. Now, something common, especially for beginners, is to start painting and call it finished after a single pass, not having a second look at the painting. This is of course very understandable in the sense that one may not even know what things to work on anymore, or what things to improve, or how it could be done if one is just starting out. Some, on the other hand, may just quit at that stage because fixing things is too much work and would be bothersome. I know, as I've been guilty of this many times in the past. Thankfully lately not so much anymore, as I've become fairly decent at checking for the things I want in a painting, and I honestly can't live with errors if I see them, at least if it's in a painting that is meant as an artwork, not just a study of some kind. All in all, this I think is more of an outcome-oriented problem, and a helpful tool for people struggling with this finishing part of the painting process is something that some refer to as window shading. This comes from a technique where you cover most of the canvas and leave a window, in quotes, to look through. That way you can just see a single small area of the painting, say the ear of a portrait. The goal then is to finish that area, and then when you're fully happy with that area, move to the next one if you still have time left in your painting session. In reality, people don't actually go through the trouble of covering the canvas and leaving a window, at least when working professionally, but the mindset holds. This term is something that is used at the Grand Central Atelier in New York as far as I understand, but in Angel Academy we just called it second painting. We were trained from graphite through charcoal all the way to painting to keep this focused finish thing in mind, not jumping around the work and working everything all at once. This is a really efficient way to bring an artwork to a really high level of finish. I think the advantage is that you can focus on single areas and really refine them as far as possible, even though it may take a lot of time. You can basically go as far as count the areas that you need to still work to finish the painting. This makes it easy for an outcome-oriented painter like me to set clear goals to work on. Estimating the amount of work comes with experience, of course, when you start to have a good idea of how long it takes to paint a certain thing. Some locks of hair, for example, might be a lot faster to render out than an eye, for example. It is psychologically way different and much better, in my opinion, to think that there are 8 more areas to work on, so I will finish this next Wednesday, when in the same situation you could be saying, I still have such a large area to work, it will take forever to finish. In one situation you have a clear goal and a timeline in your mind, and the other one is a sort of abstract workload that you don't really know when it's gonna be finished. This way of thinking is not for everyone, but to some people it might be very useful. One example is my friend in school, Cameron Copley-Heisig. For his final still life project, he had a huge list of things he would work on in his painting, and basically he had a day-to-day schedule for almost the whole term of school. He was meant to graduate that term, so planning out like that, he knew for sure that he could actually finish his painting in time for the end of that school term and graduate. He also has a fairly new YouTube channel, so go check his stuff out as well. I will link his page in the description. Now, as an added bonus, when working with this kind of focused finish way of painting, it's really hard to overlook an area when working like this, as sometimes in a complex painting you can focus too much on whatever is in the center of attention and forget some areas, which can result in a worse finish. Sometimes in a painting you don't want to finish everything evenly. That is not what I'm saying here. but at least it is good to give every area the attention it deserves, whether you actually end up painting refinements or not. Now, after having said all that, coming back to this painting, the fish, even though they were fun to paint, were something so repetitive in a way that I had to make myself finish the job even though I wasn't enjoying it that much anymore towards the end. So my strategy here was to go in sections and have a nice concentration for around 30 minutes at a time. This is something I recommend to those who have something repetitive to paint, and maybe in general too, as it is good to take breaks occasionally and come back with fresh eyes. Now, painting repetitive stuff comes from experience, as for one of my still lifes, my first one actually, I made the huge mistake of picking this rope background, which you can see in this image here. This background alone was basically more than 40 hours of painting and basically gave me a slight strain injury in my right forearm, and I would not recommend it to anyone. So nowadays I'm a bit pickier about what I choose to paint. That is a lesson learned for sure. Now, that was a lot of stuff about something I just kind of thought about. I hope it made sense. Maybe it didn't. Anyway, I certainly hope you enjoy my voice if you got this far. Or maybe some of you just came for the time lapse and muted the video. That's fine too. Now, for future videos, if you have some topics you're interested in or some problems you're facing when painting or drawing, let me know in the comments or send me a message on Instagram. Maybe I have something pretentious to say about it. Anyhow, thanks for watching and see you on the next one.